I'm not broken, just quieter than I used to be. And tonight, I remember how to speak. The room gave me its little noises. Plates touching down, a fork skittering, the thermostat clicking like a metronome for family manners. I could feel the old concussion behind my right eye, a ghost ache that visits when the barometer drops or when disrespect enters a room. The turkey steamed. My granddaughter, sweet kid, rearranged cranberries into a smile on her plate. My son, Daniel, watched me like a man checking a fence for weak boards. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. He waited for the laugh to die after my small story about a field stove in '89. Then he leaned back, his voice all casual poison. You know, Dad, you're kind of burdened. Silence found silver in every utensil. The thermostat clicked again. My wife's hand froze around her napkin. My daughter-in-law poured water with a smile that looked stapled on. For a moment, the concussion hum became an orchestra, and I saw the room from far away. The good plates, the flag folded in its triangle on the bookshelf, the shadow of the ceiling fan like slow helicopter blades over a man who once crawled under real ones. A younger version of me would have stood up so fast the chair would have died. The man I'd become took a breath, so measured it could have been a drill. I set my fork down like ordnance. That the word you're landing on, Danny? I said, burden? He shrugged. It's not an insult. It's reality. You forget things. You wander. We handle a lot for you. I handle my own sunrise, I said, and I pay for this roof. He laughed. With what? The insurance that keeps going to specialists who say you're fine? We can't keep doing this dance. You barely drive. I stopped driving because I can count cost, I said. Counting isn't a symptom. My wife looked at me, and the look wasn't a rope thrown into water. It was a checklist. Her mouth tried to shape something tender, then didn't. That told me more than any sentence would. The veteran's coin in my pocket warmed against my leg. I turned it with my thumb, the way I used to turn a compass bezel, finding north inside a storm. Grandpa's not a burden, my granddaughter whispered. He's just old. Old enough to hear, I told her, old enough to choose his words. Daniel reached for the wine, like a judge taking a pen. We're not doing this now, he said. He was right. We weren't. I have learned to pick battles you can win with witnesses, and battles you win by letting the other man tell you what he wants. So what do you want? I asked. To be practical, he said. To plan. For when you can't sign your name straight. For when the house is too much. We're all thinking it. Oh, the word tried to bruise. I looked at my wife. Her eyes lowered, not out of shame but accounting. The fan blades turned. Somewhere a dog barked twice, a cadence from an old training field. Ready, move. I raised my glass. To practical men, I said, may they never mistake convenience for love. That landed like a dull round. Daniel smiled without his eyes. To realism, he answered. Our glasses met. Mine rang true. His sounded like something already cracked. The rest of dinner was a parade of careful non-remarks. I asked my granddaughter about her science project. I complimented the sweet potatoes. I watched Daniel watch me, the way a man watches a fuse, impatient, expecting heat that refuses him. When he hugged me goodbye, his mouth close to my ear, he said, soft and clean, we'll talk soon. Seriously, soon is a slippery word. I said, I prefer dates. Monday, he said, we'll sort some papers. Papers. North. Found. After dishes, after the thermostat clicked its last note, I walked to my study. The flag in the case caught the lamplight. The veteran's coin sat warm in my hand. Visual anchors matter. I unlocked the bottom drawer. Then the small safe nested inside. Spinning numbers I could do even in a storm. The handle turned. Cool air breathed out. I reached for the thick manila envelope, where I keep the policy, the backbone of practical men. My fingers closed on empty felt. The safe had never betrayed me before. For 30 years, that metal box had guarded birth certificates, discharge papers, my wife's jewelry, the photographs that didn't deserve a frame but couldn't be thrown away. Now its silence mocked me. The thick envelope, my insurance policy, gone. I pulled every file, every receipt, every faded tax form. Nothing. The smell of old paper clung to my hands. I shut my eyes, and the hum behind my ear thickened into the same hollow sound I'd heard in bunkers when a charge goes off too close. My fingers traced the felt lining, searching for a tear, a fold, any clue. Empty. I sat back, breathing through my nose. No forced entry. No broken lock. Whoever opened this safe had the code or the patience to watch me spin it. And in this house, only 2 other people had that chance. The dining room light still glowed through the doorframe. I heard plates clatter. My wife loading the dishwasher, moving like nothing in the world had shifted. But the world had. A man without his insurance is just flesh waiting to be priced. I picked up the phone, dialed the company. A recorded voice told me their lines were closed until morning. Convenient. I left it on the desk, stared at the flag in its case, the compass coin beside it, old tokens of loyalty, symbols I used to trust. At midnight, I found myself standing in the hallway, listening. The floorboard betrayed everyone. Daniel's heavy heel step when he visited, my wife's soft shuffles. Tonight, the house gave me nothing but its own breath. I went back to the study, turned off the lamp, and sat in the dark, hand on the desk like a sentry at his post. By morning, the smell of coffee was already in the air. My wife moved about the kitchen. She didn't ask why I looked tired. She didn't mention the safe. She didn't mention Daniel's parting words at dinner. Maybe she thought silence was mercy. Maybe she thought silence was strategy. Morning, she said, handing me a mug. Morning, I answered. I watched her eyes. They didn't hold me long. I carried the mug back to the study, closed the door, and pulled a yellow pad from the drawer. I wrote down everything. Dinner, Daniel's word burden, his whisper about papers, the missing envelope. I wrote like a man laying out coordinates on a map. If I couldn't trust the voices in my house, I'd trust the ink in my hand. The days stretched slow. Daniel didn't call, not yet. My wife moved through her chores like a ghost, watering plants, folding laundry. The envelope did not reappear. No explanation landed on my desk. Late afternoon, I opened the safe again. Still nothing. I touched the cold steel and realized a truth that was sharper than any battlefield order. Someone inside my own perimeter had crossed a line. Someone had touched what kept me independent. I poured myself a glass of water, swallowed it like whiskey, and whispered into the empty room. So this is the game. The thermostat clicked. The house seemed to listen. That night, as I checked the locks on the doors, a decision hardened in me. Whatever they were planning, they had underestimated what 60 years and one war had taught me. I didn't need speed. I didn't need youth. I needed patience, memory, and the will to wait them out. Still, patience wouldn't bring back the envelope. Evidence, I thought. I needed evidence. Not accusations, not suspicions. Evidence. And as I closed the study door, I knew the first step. Tomorrow, I would start recording my own house. The same walls that heard my son call me a burden would now bear witness to his true voice. I turned the coin over in my palm, feeling its edges. A veteran's compass. North was set. And when the truth came out, it would not be whispered. It would be undeniable. I placed the coin back on the desk, the light glinting off its surface. Then, from somewhere deep in the quiet house, a floorboard creaked, as if someone was already listening. I didn't sleep much after that creak in the hallway. When dawn finally bled through the blinds, my eyes were already open, my body still and heavy in the chair. Age makes you slower to rise, but it also makes you quieter, like fog that lingers after the storm. The insurance policy was gone, but the silence of my house was louder. Breakfast with my wife was a ceremony without prayer. She buttered toast, poured orange juice, asked if I wanted 1 egg or 2. Not a word about Daniel. Not a word about papers. Her silence was starting to feel rehearsed. Did you check the safe yesterday? I asked, my voice soft, careful. She didn't look up. For what? You know what? Her knife paused on the toast. Then she shrugged. No. Why would I? Why indeed? I let it drop. On the battlefield you learn. Sometimes the first bullet isn't the one that kills you. It's the one that tells you which shooter is hiding. After she left to visit the store, I sat in the study and turned the veteran's coin between my fingers. Every scratch in its brass face reminded me of a moment where patience had meant survival. I had to choose my moments now. Anger is expensive, doubt even more so. So I started a new ritual. Each evening, after dishes, I walked the halls of my own home like a night patrol. I listened for the boards that betrayed weight. I measured the silence. And every morning, I added notes to the yellow pad, times, sounds, who was where. It looked like paranoia. But paranoia is just awareness without proof. The missing envelope was an accident. It was a test, maybe a warning. They wanted me to know they could touch my independence. But they also wanted me to doubt myself, to wonder if I had misplaced it, to make me my own unreliable witness. That was the cruel part. I thought about Daniel, his smirk when he called me a burden, his voice at my ear promising papers. He had inherited my jawline, but none of my patience. He wanted shortcuts. He wanted control without earning it. And my wife, her silence was worse than his words. Silence builds scaffolding for betrayal. At night, I sat in the living room, the TV flickering war documentaries I half-watched, half-measured against my own memories. Helicopters in grainy footage, muddy boots, the sound of men breathing in fear. And I realized something. This house wasn't my fortress anymore. It was contested ground. That thought was heavier than the concussion hum. A man should feel safe in his own walls. I didn't. So I planned. The coin turned in my palm, north steady, compass true. I would give the walls ears. The house would speak for me. But before I could take that step, I needed to watch the people closest to me, to test their tells. The next day, when Daniel came by, I let him find me in the study. I left the safe door open, deliberately. His eyes caught it the second he walked in. He tried to mask it, but a soldier sees a twitch before the punch. "Dad," he said, too casual, "you left this open." Did I? I closed it slowly, spun the dial, clicked the lock. His eyes tracked every movement. "You really should let me hold on to the important stuff," he added, "just in case." I smiled without warmth. "In case of what, Danny?" "In case you forget. You know, with your memory and all." I wrote his words down that night. Memory and all. The phrase burned. The house had become a chessboard. I wasn't the king waiting to be cornered. I was the player setting the trap. And soon, when the walls began to listen, I'd finally hear the truth out loud. That night, as I lay awake, the coin resting on my chest, I heard it again, the faintest creak in the hallway. Not hesitation. Not chance. A step. Someone was moving in my house. I bought the recorder under the cover of groceries. A man my age buying batteries, paper towels, and a small black device doesn't raise eyebrows. The cashier didn't even look at me. Her eyes stayed glued to her phone as she scanned. That was fine. The less attention, the better. Back home, I unpacked the bag slow, listening for the rhythm of my wife's footsteps in the kitchen. I tucked the recorder into my jacket pocket, thumb brushing the switch until it clicked alive. A faint red light glowed, my first ally in a house full of shadows. That night, I waited until the house exhaled into silence. My wife went to bed early, humming through the hallway, the same tune she used to soothe Daniel as a child. Now it sounded like a lullaby for something colder. I stayed behind, sitting in the dim dining room, pretending to nurse tea until her door clicked shut. Then I slid the recorder under the table, right at the center beam, where meals and conversations happened, where truths slipped out between sips of wine. I pressed a button. A soft beep. The house had new ears. The next morning, I played it back in the study. At first, nothing but a hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. Hours of silence. Then voices. Daniel's. We can file before the end of the month. Judges like clean cases. He's had episodes. Forgetfulness. That's enough. My wife's voice lower, hesitant. He still manages. He's not helpless. Mom, you saw him last night. He couldn't even keep track of where he put his papers. A pause. The scrape of a chair. My wife again. What if he notices? He won't, Daniel said, his confidence sharp. And even if he does, it doesn't matter. Once the court gets the petition, it's out of his hands. Silence followed, thick and cruel. I stopped the tape, sat back. The room swam, not from concussion, but from clarity. They weren't guessing at betrayal. They were confirming it. The words were there, caught, undeniable. Recognition is a weapon. And now I had the first piece of evidence. That evening, I studied them like enemies across a table. Daniel with his rehearsed charm, his eyes darting to see if I noticed his casual digs. My wife, quieter than usual, moving plates like they weighed too much. Every word they spoke had to cross my recorder first. Every smile tested against what I knew was hidden beneath. Dad, Daniel said over dinner, you ever think about, making things easier for Mom? Like signing over some responsibilities? I kept my fork steady. Responsibilities are lighter than regrets, son. He smirked, thought it clever. But I saw the flicker, the quick glance at my wife, her eyes lowering like shutters. That night, I played the tape again, rewound betrayal until it etched itself into my bones. My own family speaking of me like a case file, not a man. The house had spoken, and the truth was uglier than I had braced for. I slid the recorder into the desk drawer, next to the veteran's coin. One symbol for where I'd been. One tool for where I was going. The war had started. And somewhere deep down, I realized the next move wouldn't come from me. It would come from outside these walls. Because when betrayal breeds indoors, it always leaks into the street. The question was, who else already knew? The neighbor caught me off guard. Not by knocking. He never did. But by calling me over the fence the way men in uniform used to call across trenches. Direct, no ceremony. Carter, he said, leaning on the post with his coffee mug. Your boy was at the courthouse yesterday. The words froze the morning air. My garden gloves tightened, dirt crumbling between my fingers. I straightened slowly, spine stiff from a night of too little sleep and too many recordings. At the courthouse? I asked, as if the word meant less than it did. He nodded, asked around about guardianship proceedings, about what it takes to prove someone can't handle their own affairs. The shovel in my hand suddenly weighed like a rifle. Guardianship. They weren't whispering anymore. They were drafting the map of my burial, legal, clean, permanent. You sure? I asked, sure as a man can be when the clerk he plays poker with told me. He sipped his coffee, eyes narrowing. Listen, I didn't mean to stir trouble, but I figured you ought to know. I thanked him the way a soldier thanks for intel, short, flat, grateful. Then I went back inside, dirt still on my gloves, heart pounding like artillery in my ribs. In the study, I sat at the desk and pulled out the yellow pad. I wrote down the neighbor's words. I underlined guardianship 3 times. The house had whispered its truth to me through the recorder, but now the street was echoing it. My enemy wasn't just in my dining room. He was already marching in public. I replayed last night's recording, the one where Daniel's voice talked about episodes and forgetfulness. Combined with courthouse whispers, it painted a perfect picture of strategy. His, not mine. He was building a case the way generals build sieges, slowly, from every side. That evening, Daniel dropped by. He came in with the air of a man doing a favor by existing. He carried a bottle of wine he hadn't paid for, the tag from the discount store still tucked beneath the label. Thought we could share a glass, he said. I poured 2, though I didn't touch mine. He swirled his, studied the color as if he was a connoisseur. He wasn't. He was buying time. You seem distracted lately, he said. You okay? I tilted my head. Why wouldn't I be? He smirked. Losing track of things. Forgetting. I leaned closer, my voice steady. Funny you mentioned that. My memory's sharp enough to recall where you were yesterday. His smirk cracked, just a hair. Where I was. The courthouse, I said. The pause stretched. His fingers tightened on the glass stem, knuckles whitening. Then he chuckled, shaking his head. Who told you that? Nosy neighbors? You know how people talk. They don't invent entire buildings, I said. For a moment, I saw something raw in his eyes. Then he smoothed it over, laughed louder. Dad, come on. You're being paranoid. I was asking about property tax. That's all. I let the silence answer him. Silence is heavier than words when you let it. He finished his wine in one swallow, set the glass down, and stood. You're imagining things. Don't let your mind play tricks on you. When he left, I stayed at the table, staring at the empty glass he'd touched. My hands shook, not from fear, but from clarity. This was no longer suspicion. It was war, documented and confirmed. And the next move would not be made in shadows. Because when a man starts lying with that much confidence, he's preparing to step into daylight. I closed the study door, turned the recorder in my hand, and whispered to the coin beside it, "Let him come. I'll be ready." I drove out past the edge of town where the houses thin and the horizon feels wide again. The road bent toward an old diner, the kind that smells of grease and black coffee no matter the hour. Parked outside was a truck I knew as well as my own heartbeat, beat-up Ford. Faded green, front bumper scarred like its owner. Inside, he was already waiting. Big shoulders, hair gone silver but still cut short, eyes that missed nothing. Raymond Cole, my brother in everything but blood. We hadn't fought side by side in 30 years, but the bond of men who shared trenches doesn't dissolve with time. "Carter," he said, standing to shake my hand. His grip was still iron. "Heard you've been under fire." "Different battlefield." I answered, sliding into the booth, but the shells feel familiar. We ordered coffee, no food. He didn't need details yet. He just waited, patient as ever, until the silence around us grew thick enough to carry truth. "My own son," I said finally, calling me a burden, stealing my insurance papers, planning to put me under guardianship. Raymond's jaw flexed. That boy doesn't know what kind of man he's crossing. He knows enough to think I won't fight back. He thinks 60 years makes me deaf, blind, weak. I pulled the recorder from my pocket, set it on the table between us. But the house talks. I've got them on tape. Him and my wife. Raymond studied the device. Then me. "So you're building a case." "Not just a case," I said. "A defense. If they come at me in court, I won't be caught flat-footed. I'll hit first with evidence." He leaned in, voice low. "You'll need more than one recorder, more than one angle. They'll deny, they'll spin. You need proof that doesn't bend." "That's why I called you," I said. "You were always the man with tools." A grin cracked his weathered face. "Still am. I've got cameras, sensors, gear that would make a lawyer sweat before a trial even starts. And I've got time." The waitress topped our cups, her eyes lingering on the scars across my hand. She didn't ask questions. She never had. "Why now, Carter?" Raymond asked once she walked away. "Why not let it slide? Why not just walk away?" I took a long sip before answering. Because walking away teaches them I was everything they said I was. A burden. A man ready to hand over his dignity for peace at the table. I won't die in chains built by my own blood. He nodded once, sharp. Then we fight. For the next hour, we sketched plans on napkins. Where to place recorders, how to secure documents, even how to back up files so they couldn't vanish. It felt like briefing before a mission. Coffee rings instead of maps, but the tension was the same. When I finally slid from the booth, Raymond clapped my shoulder. "You're not alone, Carter. Not now, not ever. You got me in this trench." The words hit harder than any shell. For weeks I've been walking through my own home like a man already ghosted. Now, with him beside me, the weight shifted. The battlefield was still mine, but I wasn't carrying the rifle alone. We walked out into the fading afternoon light. His truck rumbled to life, coughing like an old soldier clearing his throat. He waved, then pulled away, leaving the smell of diesel and loyalty behind him. I stood there a long time, the coin warm in my pocket, the recorder heavy in my hand. For the first time since Daniel's whisper over dinner, I felt something dangerous stirring inside me. Not just anger. Resolve. The war had its first ally. And back home, I knew the enemy was already growing suspicious. Because betrayal, once it senses resistance, always sharpens its teeth. The shift in the house was almost immediate. My wife's footsteps sounded sharper, her eyes flickering toward me longer than before, as though measuring how much I knew. Daniel visited twice in 3 days, both times arriving unannounced. He paced the living room like a landlord, touching picture frames, adjusting coasters, as if the place already belonged to him. Paranoia works both ways. I planted new recorders with Raymond's help, one under the couch, another behind the bookshelf, and a third disguised inside a clock on the mantel. Each device blinked its red eye at me, silent sentries watching the watchers. On Tuesday evening, Daniel sat across from me at the dining table, his voice louder than casual conversation required. "Dad, you've been restless lately. Mom says you're up at odd hours, walking the hall. You losing sleep?" I chewed slowly, kept my face calm. A man my age doesn't need much sleep. A man your age needs more manners. He laughed too quickly. "Always sharp, huh? Just checking in. Don't want you stressing over things that aren't real." His eyes flicked toward the bookshelf, where one of the recorders hid. Did he know? Or was guilt just making him twitch? Later that night, the recorder caught him whispering to my wife in the kitchen. "He's on to something. I don't know how much, but he's not acting clueless anymore." Her voice came soft, strained. "Then move faster. The longer we wait, the more he suspects." Hearing her words cracked something inside me deeper than the concussion ever had. She wasn't just silent anymore. She was active, a co-conspirator. My own home had turned into enemy territory, each room a trench, each doorway a line of fire. I started carrying a small notebook in my breast pocket, jotting down every phrase, every look, every shift in tone. They can gaslight me, but they can't erase ink, I told myself. At night, I cross-referenced my notes with the recordings. Patterns emerged. Daniel always pushed responsibility talk after wine. My wife always avoided eye contact when he mentioned documents. Nerves. Strategy. Fear. Thursday afternoon, as I trimmed hedges in the yard, I caught them through the kitchen window. Daniel stood close to her, both speaking low but heated. He gestured toward me with a sharp tilt of his chin. She shook her head, her lips tight. Then she saw me watching. The curtain dropped like a stage act ending too soon. I smiled to myself, clipped another branch, and thought, paranoia is a mirror. They see it in me because it's consuming them too. That night, I left the study door half open, lamp on, yellow pad in plain sight. I pretended to fall asleep in the armchair. At 2 a.m, floorboards creaked. I kept my breathing steady. The outline of a figure paused at the threshold. Not my wife, too broad. Daniel. He lingered, silent, then withdrew. A recon mission of his own. He wanted to know how close I was to the truth. The next morning, he showed up with forced cheer. "Coffee, Dad," he offered, pouring me a cup before I answered. His hands trembled just enough to rattle the spoon. I took the cup, held it, but didn't drink. "You look tired, son," I said. He swallowed hard, eyes darting to the study door. "Just busy. We'll talk soon. Real soon." I nodded, pocketing my notebook. The coin pressed against it, warm, steady. The battlefield was tightening. They thought I was isolated. What they didn't know was that every whispered plot, every late-night creak, was now my ammunition. And soon, when their paranoia boiled over, they'd show their hand too fast. I just had to wait for the moment to strike. Because nothing unravels conspiracy faster than fear of discovery. The storm broke on a Saturday afternoon. No rain outside, just tension that finally snapped its leash. Daniel arrived with a folder under his arm, the kind of corporate binder you'd carry into a boardroom. His wife trailed behind him, lips tight, eyes sharp. My wife set out coffee cups as if this were a casual visit, but her hands shook. Daniel dropped the folder on the table between us. The sound was louder than porcelain breaking. "Dad," he said, his voice rehearsed, "it's time to be realistic. We've drafted the paperwork for guardianship. You don't have to fight it. Just sign and everything stays simple. Guardianship." He said it out loud now, no more whispers. The word hung heavy in the room. I didn't reach for the folder. I let the silence sit there like a landmine. Finally, I asked, And if I don't, his smirk carried the confidence of a man who thinks he's already won. Then we file in court. Judges don't like messy family disputes, Dad. They'll side with reason. They'll side with me. This way we keep it clean. No headlines. No shame. The arrogance in his voice was worse than the threat. He believed I was cornered, a tired old soldier without ammunition. He believed he was holding the only gun in the room. You came into my house, I said slowly, and set this down like a bill I forgot to pay. Because that's what it is, he snapped. A bill. You've been living on borrowed time, and we're covering for you. It's time you admitted it. My wife didn't meet my eyes. She folded her napkin, unfolded it, folded it again. Her silence was louder than his shouting. I opened the folder at last, scanning the neat lines, the legalese. Words like incapacitated person and petitioner glared at me. They prepared everything. They thought I'd break at the sight of signatures, waiting for mine. I closed it gently. You know what happens when you push a man into a corner, Danny? He leaned forward. He learns to accept help. I shook my head. No, he learns to bite. His wife scoffed, her voice cutting. You can bluster all you want, but the court will see the truth. You can't even keep your insurance papers straight. We're protecting you from yourself. Protecting. A sweet word covering poison. I stood, pushing the chair back slow. My knees cracked, but my voice didn't. You mistake patience for weakness. You mistake silence for surrender. Daniel pushed the folder toward me again. Sign it, or we do this the hard way. I looked at the folder, then at him. His jaw was tight, his hand resting on the table, as if he expected me to snatch the papers and crumble. Instead, I stepped closer, leaned down so he could hear the steel in my whisper. The hard way is the only way I've ever known. His eyes flickered, not fear yet, but doubt. A crack. I left the folder unopened on the table and walked out of the room. Behind me, I heard him mutter to his wife, he'll fold. He has to. But I didn't fold that night. I sat in the study with the recorder humming, the coin in my hand, and Raymond's napkin plan spread across the desk. They thought they'd cornered me. They didn't know I'd already sent the first batch of recordings to an old friend-in-law. The trap was set, and by the time they realized, it would be too late to retreat. I didn't sleep after Daniel dropped that folder on the table. I left it sitting there overnight, the legal threat pulsing in the dark like an unexploded shell. At dawn, I carried it to the study, opened it again under the lamp, and read every line. Each page was a bullet aimed at my independence. Incapacitated, petitioner, best interest. They wanted to strip my name off my own life. But they didn't know that while they sharpened their knives, I'd already built my shield. Weeks earlier, after the first whispers on the recorder, I had contacted Edward Hale, an old friend turned attorney, a man who once pulled me out of a collapsed trench. He didn't just understand the law. He understood loyalty. Every tape, every note from my yellow pad, I'd scanned and delivered to him through Raymond's careful hands. By now, Edward had enough evidence to choke the clean narrative Daniel was preparing. I wrote a fresh entry in my notebook. They think they're forcing my signature. They don't realize my counterstrike is already in motion. That afternoon, Raymond came by. We sat in the garage with the door half open, the smell of oil and rust wrapping around us like old comrades. He slid a small box across the workbench. 2 more recorders, slimmer than a deck of cards. Plant these where they don't expect, he said. Kitchen cabinet. Bedroom vent. You'll catch them talking when they think you're asleep. I nodded, pocketed the devices. My hands didn't shake. Strategy steadied me. That evening, as my wife cleared dishes, Daniel lingered in the kitchen. His voice carried, practiced but edged with impatience. He'll sign, Mom. Don't worry. He always caves when the pressure gets heavy. I froze in the hallway, the hidden recorder catching every syllable. My wife sighed, not with regret, but with weary agreement. Just make sure it doesn't get ugly. It won't, Daniel said, too sure. By next month, it'll all be settled. He won't even know what happened. I smiled in the dark. That arrogance would be my weapon. Later, in the study, I cataloged everything. recordings labeled with dates, transcripts drafted in neat block letters. I sealed them in envelopes marked for Edward. The package was already prepared. If anything happened to me, if they tried to rush to court, the truth would surface in ways they couldn't contain. They thought the war was about papers and signatures. But wars aren't won on paper. They're won by preparation. The next morning, Daniel arrived again, folder still under his arm, confidence still dripping. "Thought about it, Dad?" he asked. "Yes," I said evenly. "And?" I looked him dead in the eye. I thought about how a man without honor is just a child with sharper teeth. His smirk faltered, but he masked it quick. "You'll come around. You always do." He left the folder on the table again, like bait. When the door closed, I didn't touch it. Instead, I turned to the study, where my real arsenal waited: tapes, notes, and allies who didn't betray their own. The war had entered its next phase. And soon, the world outside these walls would hear what I already knew inside them. Because once you arm truth with proof, even family can't silence it. The courthouse smelled of old paper and ambition. Polished floors echoed footsteps like drums, each beat carrying the weight of judgment. I walked in slow, steady, cane tapping head high, not a victim shuffling toward surrender. No, a soldier entering his chosen battlefield. Daniel was already there, his wife beside him, their clothes sharp enough to cut. He saw me and smiled, that rehearsed lawyer's smile he must have practiced in the mirror. My wife sat behind them, hands clasped in her lap, eyes darting anywhere but mine. She hadn't chosen a side out loud, but silence is gravity, and I felt its pull. The clerk called us in. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Plain walls, one flag, one seal of the state. But the air, it was thick with consequence. Daniel's attorney stood, painting a picture with careful words. A father slipping, confused, irresponsible. He mentioned the missing insurance policy, the notes about sleepless nights, the erratic behavior. Each phrase was a shovel full of dirt, trying to bury me alive. When it was Daniel's turn, he leaned forward in his chair, voice dripping with pity. "My father's a good man, Your Honor, but he's not the man he once was. We only want what's best for him, for his safety, for his safety." The lie almost drew a laugh from me. He spoke like a savior, but his eyes betrayed hunger for control, for possession. Then the judge turned to me. "Mr. Carter, do you wish to respond?" I rose slowly, the room silent but for the soft scrape of my chair. I placed a small recorder on the table. It's red-eye cold now, but its memory full. Next to it, a thick envelope sealed by Edward's careful hands. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. My voice carried not volume but weight. I may be older. I may walk slower than I did at 20. But I know when my own blood tries to steal the ground beneath my feet. The judge motioned to my attorney. Edward, steady as a stone. He stood, opened the envelope, and handed over transcripts, audio files, dates, times. Each page a bullet fired back. The court listened as Daniel's voice filled the speakers. "We can file before the end of the month. Judges like clean cases. He's had episodes." Then my wife's softer tones. "What if he notices?" Finally, Daniel again, confident, cruel. "He won't. And even if he does, it doesn't matter." The words hung heavy, undeniable. The courtroom shifted, the air different now. The masked Daniel had worn cracked before everyone. The judge's brow furrowed. He leaned forward. "Mr. Carter's recordings make it abundantly clear that this petition is not about protection. It is about exploitation. This court does not and will not sanction such abuse." The gavel struck once, sharp as a gunshot. "The petition for guardianship is denied." Gasps fluttered through the room. Daniel's face drained to color, his wife's hand tightening around his arm. My wife bowed her head, shame heavy on her shoulders. I stood straighter than I had in years, the veteran's coin warm in my pocket, my dignity intact. The first public battle was won. But this war wasn't over. Not yet. Because justice in a courtroom is one thing. Justice at home, where betrayal was born, would demand more. And I intended to deliver it. The courtroom emptied like a theater after a tragedy. Everyone whispering about the villain who'd just been unmasked. Daniel avoided my eyes as he stormed out, his wife trailing behind him, face pale and tight. My wife lingered in the back row, staring at her hands as though they might tell her what side she belonged to. Edward clapped me once on the shoulder. "It's done," he said. "They can't touch you now. But, Carter, what you do next will matter more than what just happened." He was right. A single victory doesn't end a campaign. It sets the stage for the final move. That night, I sat in my study with a veteran's coin and a blank sheet of paper. The gavel's echo still rang in my head, but louder than that was Daniel's smirk at the dinner table weeks ago, calling me a burden. Louder still was the whisper of my wife agreeing in the kitchen that I wouldn't notice. If they saw me as a burden, then I would give them exactly nothing to carry. So I drafted my will, every line cut through betrayal like wire. The house, the savings, a pension, everything that could have been Daniel's inheritance, I stripped from his grasp. Instead, I built a trust, a fund for wounded veterans who had no family to shield them. Men who had fought like me but didn't have a Raymond or an Edward at their side. To my wife, I left a choice, her share intact, so long as she remained independent. No guardianship, no control surrendered to Daniel. If she stood as her own woman, she would be provided for. If she chose his side, she would walk away with nothing but her silence. Each word hardened my resolve. I wasn't punishing them out of spite. I was drawing a map of honor, making sure my life ended with the same integrity I had fought for in deserts and jungles decades before. By dawn, the document was signed and sealed. Edward would file it officially within days. The ink dried like blood on bandages, permanent, undeniable. At breakfast, I found Daniel waiting at the table, eyes red, anger simmering. He didn't waste time. "You embarrassed me yesterday," he hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this family?" "This family?" I said, setting down my coffee. I defended it from a thief wearing my last name. His jaw clenched. He looked at my wife, as if expecting her to back him. She looked down, twisting her napkin again. That silence of hers, cowardice, complicity, maybe even regret. "You think you've won," Daniel said, "but you haven't. You can't live forever, Dad. And when you're gone..." I cut him off. "When I'm gone, you'll have nothing. Not a dime. Not a key. Not even the coin I carry." The words landed harder than I intended. He froze, searching my face for weakness. There was none. That night, I watched him drive away from the house, tires spitting gravel like bullets. His anger had no place to go now but inward. The war was nearly finished. The court had denied him. My will had erased him. But I knew Daniel. He would not go quietly. He would come back for one last strike, one last chance to claw at dignity he'd already lost. And when he did, I would be ready. Because the final image of this war had to be more than a judgment or a document. It had to be a reckoning. Daniel came back 2 nights later, not with folders or lawyers, but with rage. His car screeched into the driveway, headlights cutting across the lawn like searchlights. I sat in the study, the lamp low, waiting. The veteran's coin pressed against my palm, steady as a heartbeat. The door slammed open. He didn't knock. His wife trailed behind him, face tight with fear or fury. I couldn't tell which. My wife lingered in the hallway, wringing her hands. "You think you won?" Daniel barked, storming into the study. "You humiliated me in court. You made me look like a leech in front of strangers. Do you know what that does to my name?" I stood, slow and deliberate, cane in hand. "Your name?" I asked. "You stained it yourself." He jabbed a finger toward me, trembling with anger. "You don't get it, do you? You're supposed to fade out quietly, let the next generation take over. Instead, you're clinging to everything like a miser. You've ruined me, Dad." Behind him, his wife muttered, "Daniel, stop." But he shook her off. "You left me nothing," he roared. "You put everything in some charity, left Mom scraps, and me? You cut me out like I'm dead." The truth was, I had, and I didn't regret it. I stepped closer, my cane tapping the floor like a drumbeat. "You call yourself ruined because you can't take what you didn't earn. A man isn't ruined by losing inheritance. A man is ruined by losing his honor. His face twisted. He glanced toward my wife as if she'd rescue him. She only looked away. That silence, the same silence that had betrayed me, now betrayed him. "You think this is funny?" he snapped. "You think you can play martyr, stand there like some wise old soldier while I get nothing? Everyone's laughing at me. Do you know what the neighbors say? Do you know how people look at me now?" I let him rant. Let the walls hear every word. Because this was the first of 3 stages of his downfall. Public humiliation. The court had stripped him bare before strangers. Now his fury stripped him bare before family. Finally, when he stopped for breath, I said softly, "The neighbors don't laugh at you because of me. They laugh because you tried to rob your own father and failed." The silence afterward was heavier than any gavel. His wife's eyes watered. My wife covered her mouth. Daniel stood frozen, his chest heaving, the weight of truth pressing on him harder than my cane ever could. "You're nothing but a fraud," I added, my voice calm, unshaken. "And everyone sees it now." That broke him. He turned, knocking over a chair, and stormed out of the study. His wife followed, whispering desperate words I couldn't hear. The front door slammed, rattling the glass panes. I lowered myself back into the chair, the coin warm in my fist. The first humiliation had been complete. Not by force, not by violence, but by truth spoken plainly. Still, I knew Daniel. He wasn't finished. Pride never dies clean. It drags a man down with it, claws out, desperate for one more strike. The real reckoning was still ahead, and when it came, I would make sure it ended not just with defeat, but with a final image no one in this family would ever forget. The courthouse was fuller this time, not just with lawyers and clerks, but with spectators, neighbors, colleagues, even a reporter or 2. Word had spread from the first hearing like smoke from a fire, a son dragging his father into court to steal his dignity. People love a scandal, but they love justice even more. I walked in with Edward at my side, cane steady, suit pressed. Raymond was in the back row, arms folded, a mountain of silent support. The coin in my pocket felt heavy, like a medal I hadn't yet earned. Daniel sat at the petitioner's table, jaw tight, eyes burning holes in me. His wife avoided looking at anyone, shoulders stiff with shame. My wife sat in the middle, her silence once again the loudest sound in the room. The judge entered, gavel striking wood. "We are here to consider the petition of Daniel Carter against his father, John Carter." Daniel's lawyer rose, trying to repaint the story, his words polished, dripping with false concern. He spoke of episodes, confusion, safety risks. But the mask was thinner now, cracking under the weight of evidence already revealed. Then it was Edward's turn. He stood calm, unfolded a file, and pressed play. The speakers carried Daniel's own voice again, sharp and greedy. "He won't notice. And even if he does, it doesn't matter. Once the court gets the petition, it's out of his hands." Gasps fluttered through the courtroom. Heads turned toward him. Even the reporters scribbled faster. Edward continued, voice like a hammer. "This is not the voice of concerned son. This is the voice of exploitation, manipulation, and deceit." The judge's eyes locked on Daniel. "Do you deny these words are yours?" Daniel stammered. "It was taken out of context. I was worried for him." "No," I said, rising with effort but strength. "You weren't worried for me. You were worried for yourself, for what you thought you were entitled to." The judge let me continue, eyes steady on mine. "I fought in deserts and jungles. I carried men out of fire. I bled for this country. And I came home to build a life, a home, a family. But what I never expected was that the battle for my dignity would be fought under my own roof, against my own blood." The room was silent. Every eye was on me. Daniel tried to speak, but his voice broke under the weight of the silence. His wife buried her face in her hands. My wife finally looked at me, tears in her eyes, regret spilling too late. The judge leaned forward. "The petition for guardianship is hereby rejected in its entirety. Furthermore, this court recognizes the attempt as malicious. Daniel Carter, consider this your only warning before criminal consequences follow." The gavel struck. A final note of justice. The courtroom erupted in whispers. People shook their heads at Daniel, eyes narrowed with disgust. Some openly scoffed. One neighbor muttered loud enough for all to hear. Shameful. Daniel stood frozen, pale, humiliated in front of everyone. His arrogance had been stripped bare, his reputation dragged to the mud not by my hand, but by his own words. I sat back down, cane across my lap, heart steady. This was a second humiliation, public, undeniable, permanent. But even as the judge adjourned, I knew this wasn't the end. Daniel's pride was a wounded animal, and wounded animals lash out hardest when cornered. The final reckoning still waited. And when it came, it would not be in a courtroom, but in the place where betrayal was born, our home. The courthouse steps became a stage. The sun was bright, the flag above snapping in the wind, and a crowd lingered, hungry for the fallout of family war. Reporters leaned forward with microphones. Neighbors whispered, and Daniel stood beside me, red-faced, trying to claw back the ground he'd lost. He spoke first, his voice too loud, meant for the audience rather than me. My father's confused. He doesn't know what he's saying. This will all look different once people calm down. Lies spun in desperation. The crowd didn't buy it. I saw the doubt in their eyes, the smirks at the corners of their mouths. Truth had already poisoned his performance. So I gave them more. I raised my cane, tapped it once on the step for silence, and spoke. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Confused? No. I remember everything. I remember my son calling me a burden at my own table. I remember my wife's silence when he stole from me. I remember his whisper, "He won't notice. And even if he does, it doesn't matter." A ripple cut through the crowd. Reporters scribbled faster. One neighbor shook his head, muttering, "Shameless." Daniel flushed deeper, his jaw clenched. That was taken out of context. I come off the way a commander cuts through chaos. The only context is greed. A son who would rob his father while he still breathes doesn't deserve the name he carries. The murmurs rose, judgment sharpening in every I turned on him. Daniel's wife tugged at his sleeve, her face pale. My wife stood apart, clutching her purse, eyes wet but mouth closed. I took the coin from my pocket, held it up so the sunlight flashed off its worn brass. This coin has been with me through war, through fire, through nights when death was close enough to taste. It guided me home, and I will not let my own blood take from me what I earned with scars and honor. Silence fell again. Even the reporters paused, pens hovering. Daniel tried one last time, his voice cracking. "You're embarrassing yourself, Dad." "No," I said. "I'm freeing myself, and I'm showing everyone here what you are." That was the breaking point. Laughter rippled, not at me, but at him. Neighbors turned away, shaking their heads. One reporter caught his words on record, nodding at me with something like respect. Daniel's reputation, once carefully polished, lay shattered at the feet of strangers. He stormed down the steps, his wife chasing after him, shouting his name. My wife lingered, torn between shame and loyalty, but she didn't follow. Not yet. Raymond came up beside me, his hand firm on my shoulder. "That," he said, "was a strike he won't recover from." The second public humiliation was complete. Louder, sharper, more final than the courtroom itself. But I knew Daniel. He was wounded pride wrapped in flesh, and wounded pride never dies quietly. There was one humiliation left, the final image. It wouldn't happen in front of judges or crowds. It would happen in the one place that mattered most, under my own roof. And when it did, there would be no doubt who had won the war. The house was quiet when I called them together. My wife, Daniel, his wife. The air felt dense, like the minutes before a storm. I'd chosen the dining room for a reason. The same table where Daniel once called me a burden, the same that had soaked in silence like poison. Tonight, it would hear something different. I set a single envelope in the center, thick, sealed, stamped official. Daniel's eyes latched onto it like a starving dog to meat. His wife sat stiff, arms crossed. My wife twisted her napkin again and again, like a habit she couldn't break. "This," I said, tapping the envelope, "is my will." Daniel smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Finally, you've come to your senses." "No," I answered. I've come to clarity. I broke the seal and unfolded the document slowly, letting the words fill the room like smoke. Everything I own, this house, my saving, my pension, has been placed into a trust. It will serve men and women who fought where I fought, who came back with scars or without families to stand beside them. Daniel's smirk cracked. You can't be serious. I kept reading. To my wife, I leave provision, but with one condition. She must remain independent. If she allows herself to be placed under guardianship, she forfeits it all. My wife gasped softly, her napkin falling to the floor. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. And me? What about me? I met his eyes. You get nothing. Not a dime. Not this house. Not my coin. Not even the chair you're sitting in. His face went red, his voice rising into a shout. You can't cut me out. I'm your son. I leaned forward, steady, my cane pressed against the floor like a staff. A son protects his father. A son honors his blood. You are not a son. Not anymore. The silence that followed was thick and merciless. His wife stared at him with something close to horror. My wife's tears finally broke free, streaking down her face, her hands trembling on the table. Daniel laughed then, high and sharp, a sound more desperate than amused. You think this makes you noble? You think leaving everything to strangers makes you better than me? Not strangers, I said. Brothers. Men who never betrayed me. Men who carried me when you would have left me behind. I folded the will, slid it back into the envelope, and set it beside my plate. This is done. The court has it. Edward has it. Nothing you do can change it. Daniel stood, so suddenly his chair toppled backward. His wife flinched. My wife whispered his name, begging him to stop, but he couldn't hear. His pride was too loud. You've destroyed this family, he spat. You've ruined everything. I shook my head. No, I protected what was left to protect. He stormed out, the front door slamming so hard the windows rattled. His wife followed, not saying a word, her silence a verdict all its own. My wife stayed seated, staring at me with eyes that carried both sorrow and shame. The dining room was quiet again, but the silence had changed. It no longer belonged to Daniel. It belonged to me. The will was sealed, the inheritance secured. The war was nearly over. Only one act remained, the final image. And in that act, Daniel would not just lose. He would fall. The final storm came not in court, not on courthouse steps, but in my own home, the same walls where betrayal had begun. Daniel returned on a Sunday evening, uninvited, his pride bleeding into anger, his wife trailing him like a shadow that no longer believed in light. My wife stood by the dining table, eyes wide, torn between fear and duty. He burst into study where I sat, papers neatly stacked, the veteran's coin resting atop them like a seal of judgment. His voice was already breaking. You've made me a laughingstock. Everyone, neighbors, friends, they look at me like I'm dirt. You did this to me. No, I said, standing slow, cane pressing steady against the floor. You did this to yourself. He sneered, desperate. You think you've won because of that, Will? Because of your tapes? None of it matters. You'll die soon enough, and all of this will still be mine one way or another. I smiled, tired but sharp. You still don't understand. You've already lost. And then, like clockwork, the front door opened. Edward walked in with Raymond behind him, both men silent but solid. My allies, my witnesses. Daniel froze, color draining from his face as he realized he wasn't in a private argument. He was on stage again. Edward set a briefcase on the table, clicked it open, and pulled out the finalized will, stamped and sealed, filed, irrevocable, binding. He spoke for the room, for my wife, for Daniel's wife, for every ghost in these walls. Raymond crossed his arms, his gaze burning through Daniel. You ever raise your hand, your voice, or your greed against him again, you'll answer to more than just the law. The silence was suffocating. Daniel's wife stepped back from him, shaking her head. I won't be part of this anymore. She turned to me, her voice breaking. I'm sorry for everything. Then she walked out, the door closing behind her like a final verdict. My wife stayed frozen, tears carving lines down her face. She whispered, "John, I didn't mean." I held up my hand. "Silence has meaning. Yours already spoke for you." Her sobs filled the room, but I didn't soften. Some wounds are too deep for comfort. Daniel looked around, cornered in every direction. Rage shook him, but there was no place left to spend it. No court to trick. No family to manipulate. No inheritance to cling to. He stood in the ruins of his own making. I stepped closer, pressing the coin into his palm. He tried to pull away, but I held his hand shut around it. My voice was low, final. "This is the compass that guided me through war. It points the true north to honor. You'll feel its weight every time you close your hand, and know you can't follow it." I pulled back. He stared at the coin, chest heaving, eyes wet with something between fury and despair. In that moment, the last humiliation was complete. Not just stripped of wealth or respect, but stripped of the right to call himself my son. He stumbled back, muttering curses that fell flat against the silence. Then he was gone, the door slamming, his footsteps fading into nothing. I sank into my chair, exhaustion flooding through me, but my spirit steady. The war was over. Edward packed the will. Raymond stood guard at the window. My wife wept softly in the shadows. And me? I looked at the empty seat where my son had once sat, the same table where he'd called me a burden. Tonight, it was different. Tonight, the burden was his. I lifted my glass of water, raised it to no one, and spoke aloud to the quiet house, to patience, to strategy, to dignity that can't be stolen. The walls, once conspirators, now held only my voice. That was the final image, a man not broken but unyielding, seated in his home, victorious not by force, but by endurance. The war had ended with silence, not the silence of betrayal, but the silence of peace. And for the first time in months, I could finally breathe. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right.